Hey there, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I wanted to show you how to paint these beautiful feathers with watercolors using the wet and wet technique. It's super fun and relaxing, so let's get started. For the painting, I'm going to use 100% cotton cold pressed watercolor paper by Hahnemühle. If you want beautiful and vibrant results, I would highly recommend using 100% cotton paper. For the outlines, I'm going to use a watercolor graphite HB pencil by Faber-Castell that dissolves in water. It's not super necessary for this type of painting, I just wanted to use it to test it out more. Now, to create a very simple and basic shape of a feather, start by drawing a curved line. Don't press down your pencil too hard, or otherwise you will basically carve in the outlines into the paper, and it will be difficult to erase things if necessary. Here my line was curved to the right. Then add another line right next to it to create the middle part of the feather, so the gap shouldn't be too wide. But it doesn't have to be perfect, it's just a guideline for later. Now, to create the shape of the actual feather, you want to draw lines next to the middle part left and right. But this time you want to draw the lines around 2 centimeters away from the center while following the curve. Leave out the lower part of the feather and then start drawing those lines around the middle part of the feather. Right now it kind of looks like a banana on a stick, but we will fix that now by adding a few gaps inside the feather. For this step, you basically want to cut out a piece of the feather like so. Follow the line you just created and then draw a curved triangle. You want the tip of the triangle facing the bottom of the feather, as you can see here. I added those gaps just to a few areas on the left and right side of the feather. If you're completely unsure about how exactly to draw a specific feather or where to place those details, feel free to look up some reference pictures on the internet. In this painting, the type of feathers will be pretty much the same, but to make the painting still look more interesting, I decided to make some of the feathers facing downwards and also to change up their size. And that's what I did with the second feather. I drew the middle part the same way as with the first feather, just made it smaller, and then I drew the feather the same way again, but this time facing downwards. When you change up the direction of your feathers, make sure to pay attention to where the gaps are, because here the feather was upside down compared to the first feather. The points of the small triangle were facing upwards as the lower part of the feather is facing that way. And from here you can play around with different shapes. Instead of creating the top of the feather in a round shape, you can also make them slightly pointy as I do it here. But you can also change up the curve. Instead of creating a feather that is curved to the left side, you can also change it up by making the feather curve to the right side. In my case, I just created one feather at a time and drew the next one following the direction of the previous feather. Then I filled up the space in between with smaller feathers. I think this way the whole composition looks more interesting and more lively. So now we have the outlines for all the feathers. Now, to keep the color scheme super simple and to not worry about muddy colors, I'm going to use the analogous color scheme. So here I'm going to mix colors between green and blue. To create those colors, I'm using lemon yellow and cerulean blue as they create a very vibrant green. But you can also use any other cool yellow and cool blue color. And I also used Payne's Gray just to make some areas even darker. Now, before applying the paint, let's start by applying a thin layer of water inside the first feather. So load up your brush with clean water and distribute it all over the feather while leaving out the middle part of the feather. Now, the reason why I want to apply the water first is that this way we can use the wet and wet technique to make the different colors blend into each other on top of the paper. This way you can get super beautiful transitions and loose textures. While the paper is absorbing some of the moisture into its fibers, let's prepare the first color. First, create a small puddle of water inside your mixing palette, and then add a cool blue and a little bit of cool yellow color inside. In this case, it was cerulean blue and lemon yellow. I wanted to mix a turquoise color, but you can adjust the mixture to any color you want. It's always a good idea to swatch the colors on an additional piece of paper first to make sure that you're happy with the color mixture before you start painting. And now we can go ahead and start painting the first feather. So load up your brush with paint and then start distributing it to a few areas inside the layer of water. I started at the bottom and then I carefully moved the paint around the edges because I wanted to keep those parts darker than the rest. Now, since we're using the wet and wet technique, when we apply the paint into the water, the paint spreads out while staying inside the water outline. And from here, you can play around with different colors. You can add a little bit of yellow or green on top of the feather and meld the colors together. Since we use colors that are super close to each other on the color wheel, you won't create muddy results, so you can just relax and enjoy the painting process. The layer of water will help you stay inside the lines when you apply the paint, so you can entirely focus on moving the paint around. And if you notice that some areas are already dry, don't worry, you can just reapply the water again. I also used a little bit of Payne's Gray and applied it to the bottom of the feather and along the center just to add more variety. I wanted to keep the lower part of the feather darker and lighter at the top so the beautiful green-blue colors can really shine. I also outlined the lower part of the feather and painted these little wavy feathers with the same colors as at the bottom. Some look upwards, some look downwards. Now, with the wet and wet technique, you have so many options on how to paint those feathers. For example, you can use only one color and let it melt onto the paper. Here I applied the water on top of the paper, let it absorb it a little bit, and then I added some of my Payne's Gray to a few areas. If you find something looks too dark or too light for your liking, you can always lift off some paint with a damp brush or add more paint on top. The key is to balance the water on the paper and your brush. If your brush and paper have the same amount of water, they simply block each other out. If the brush is too dry, the paint won't spread out because it will just soak up the water from the paper. So here it's best to make sure that the paper contains less water than your brush, so the paint can really flow onto the paper. To create the next feather, I wanted to use lighter colors. So I started with this yellowish green and made a transition to more bluish green. This is a really fun watercolor mixing exercise because you can play around with different ratios of different colors and really see what colors you can create. Mixing paint on top of the paper is super fun because you can really see how the colors melt into each other and create something new right on the paper. What you can also do is you can use your brush to create new patterns such as lines following the shape of the feathers. The feather doesn't have to look a certain way or look perfect. I also didn't follow any reference picture. The goal here was really to just enjoy the painting process. A lot of times we focus so much on the outcome, trying to make something look a certain way that we completely forget to enjoy the process. Instead of having a complete image in mind and getting frustrated at the end, why not just apply paint to the paper, relax, and let the paint do its magic? That's why here we only use a few colors and play around with them. You will notice how the paint interacts with the water, how the pigments melt, get lighter, and create a beautiful texture. That's the beauty of watercolors. It's also a very collaborative process because you apply the paint where you feel it's needed, and then the water will do the rest. So don't put so much pressure on yourself and don't try to fully control everything. Simply let go, relax, and enjoy the process. Also, if you feel like you don't get the same results because your colors don't spread, they look dull, or the paper just doesn't want to hold any water, I would highly recommend looking into upgrading your supplies, especially your paper. You can check out my free guide on watercolor supplies where I go into more details. You can find a link in the description box down below. Because I see so many people feeling frustrated with watercolors and they want to give up because they think it's their fault. But most of the time they struggle with this medium because they use the wrong type of supplies and expect it to behave the same way as they see in other people's work. And I don't want you to give up on such a beautiful painting medium. So make sure to check out my guide. The link is in the description box down below. Now this is how the feathers look so far. When the paint has fully dried, you can either keep the feathers the way they are right now, or you can fill out the white line with another color. I decided to brush over with my Payne's Gray and my blues while leaving out a few white areas, but you can also just cover it with a black color or gold colored ink or any other color you want. And since the feathers are now dry, you can use the wet and dry technique to add more patterns and details on top if you want. And this is the final result. Let me know in the comments if you want me to paint other types of feathers or something else in the future. I really hope this video was helpful. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!